And we are live. Welcome, folks. Welcome back if you've been listening, and I hope you have, but welcome back to the Podcaster Nation. This is the podcast that is about podcasters. It is for podcasters. And hey, guess what? It's done by podcasters. My name is Rory Podcat. I am your host, loving every minute of life right now. And I absolutely love this project we're working on. We have the greatest guests. We're having the greatest time. And thank you for joining us today on this adventure. We are introducing you to all kinds of new podcasters. They're new to me. I'm getting to meet all kinds of people from all walks of life, from all over the world, who have all kinds of different interests and opinions. And what I want to do is bring all that to you, folks. So listen up. You're going to have a great time. This guy is so qualified that his CV, like, it took up like 30% of my phone. I had to like redo the memory on my phone because this guy has so many qualifications and has done so many things. I would like you guys to help me. Welcome to the program, Larry Cougar Penton Sr., and we're going to find out what the Cougar means here in a minute. From the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. Larry, thanks for joining us today, man. How you doing?
Greetings, one, greetings all. I'm so happy to meet you, Roy, and I'm so thankful that we made this connection. I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with you, your audience, and letting them know about who I am, what I do. And also, we always want more subscribers. So, everybody, make sure that you subscribe to both podcasts, mine and Roy's, and don't just click on the like button or whatever. Leave a minimum of a 4 word, review because that feeds into the algorithm. So,
There we
hey, I
go.
like the podcast. That's all I need.
Always got to be talking about that
Let's go.
algorithm, don't we? That's right. All
Let's
right,
talk
listen.
about it.
Before we get any further, Larry, you got to tell me and you got to tell everybody else. Why are you the Cougar?
Larry Cougar Penton Sr. That is a joke that me and everybody calls me LP. So that's just my initial. So I'm actually Larry Penton Sr. The Cougar came from John Mellencamp. Okay, he used to be John Cougar Mellencamp, the rock star,
Right.
rocker, and he like Larry Fishburne, who we know now is Lawrence Fishburne. He dropped the Cougar and he went to just John Mellencamp. And when he did that, and I was always a fan of, because I'm 53, so I go way back. So I was always a fan of Mellencamp's music. And I said, you know what? He's not using Cougar anymore. Why don't I just take it up? And so I edited it to my Facebook, and it was kind of just a joke or what have you. And my wife, she was like, people are gonna look at you kind of crazy. And I said, you know what? That's the joy of it. That sparks conversation. So and I tried to change it on Facebook because that's if you look me up on Facebook, it's Larry Cougar Penton Sr. And so I tried to change it and it wouldn't let me change it. And I was like, whatever, I'll just keep it like that.
Yeah, they don't cooperate with you when you want to make changes and stuff, over there. So, all right, honestly, if you would have given me 18 to 25 guesses, I never would have come up with John Cougar in a million years. And I'm from Indiana. But
Yeah. Everybody's like, oh, and I'm like, no, it's not even that at all. Like I always get the looks and people like, why would you even put that out there like that? I'm like, no, it's not that. So
that's funny. You know what's funny is we have already in this short, young podcast that we're doing here, we have listeners from all different age groups. And I mean, you're still a young guy to me. All right. So, I'm 54. So, but the young people right now are going to be like, John Cougar, who are you talking about? What?
see, that inspires people to use your smart device
Mhm.
and do your research. That's all we want. You got all these smart devices. You got your phone. I got my iPad. I got a whole slew of Apple devices here. Use them.
Right.
You know, you know all these younger acts and all that stuff. Look at some of these older guys and these older people that are musicians because you're gonna get such a variety of music to add to your iTunes or your Spotify, whatever streaming profile. I almost said CDs. So
And they'll be
it's
like,
just a
what the
whole.
heck's a CD?
That's great. Yeah. Hey, I was a techie before I got into EMS, so I can even start back there.
All right. Well, hey, that is one of the next questions I have for you. You've done a ton. And in your own words here, introduce yourself to anybody who hasn't heard of you before, and, tell them what you do, what you've done in the past. I know you were involved with COVID, back in the day there. And, you know, also, when you're done kind of giving us what you've done, tell everybody, what you're working on too. So you go ahead and go, and I'll chime in when I need to, man. The floor is yours.
All right, so Larry Penton Sr., but before I was senior, I was just little old Larry Allen Penton, born and raised in the Midwest, right in the heart of Missouri, or I shouldn't say the heart of Missouri. Well, we call it the heart of Missouri, St. Louis. So I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. That's where I was born and raised. So born in '71, single parent. I'm my mom's only child, but my biological dad, peace be upon his eternal soul forevermore, he brought 5 children into this world. So I'm the second of 5. So I have an older sister who's 4 years my senior, then it's me, and then I have a brother and 2 younger sisters. The younger 3 have the same. And so I wasn't raised around them, even though I was less than 20 minutes from where they live. So St. Louis is the biggest, smallest city in the United States. So I call it the 6 degrees of separation city. If either you know somebody directly in St. Louis, or you're 6 degrees from knowing that person. So, and we always ask you when we find out if you're from St. Louis, what high school did you go to? Okay, so that's always a common question. You got emos, you got toasted ravioli, and the Gateway Arch and the Cardinals. And what high school did you go to? So those are one of the top 4. That's the Mount Rushmore of the St. Louis knowledge base.
Got it. All right.
I so growing up in that environment, grew up in poverty. I know that for me, my mom was just a voracious reader and learner. She had me at 17. She went to nursing school, but she stopped going to nursing school when it came time for clinicals because she couldn't deal with the blood. But I remember as a little kid, her bringing all these medical books and medical dictionaries and all this medical academia home. And I would be reading everything that she brought home because we sit at the table, lunch, breakfast, lunch, dinner. We were voracious readers, reading newspapers, magazines, whatever it was. And I remember reading all of these books that she would bring home. But I didn't, when she dropped out, I was like, oh, well, I'll just focus on something else. So I wanted to be a meteorologist when I grew up because I always like looking at tornadoes, all this weather phenomenon and stuff. Even today, I'll just sit there sometimes just binge watching tornado videos or whatever if I'm just bored. So I remember as a kid, always wanting to be that person that would want to help people. And when the Atari 2600, so we're going to age ourselves again. So for you young folks that don't know, we're talking about video games. So when the first home video entertainment system came out, it was the Atari 2600. When I got that for Christmas, I was hooked. I mean, they should have had a Gamers Anonymous back then because I'm telling you, hey, my name's Larry. I'm an addict. I would have been leading the meetings. I'm just saying. And so I knew I wanted to deal with technology from that point on. I focused on the hardware side. So as I got older, um, I started learning more and more, and I was a prodigy. I was a natural at it, and because I was such a geek, my first jobs in IT was through a nonprofit company that was in St. Louis. So I was working in public health in the public health department. It was a company called Grace Hill Neighborhood Services, and they had 5 centers around the St. Louis metro area where they offered like urgent cares, what we know as of now, and they all offered other kind of social services. So I was in this program called the Mentor Dad program, and it helped young men who were 16 to 25, fathers, stepfathers, and expecting fathers do whatever they needed to do, from changing diapers to getting jobs, getting into school, whatever, or whatever resources we could help them with. Um, also, I networked with the American Heart Association. I was a dual certified HIV and AIDS educator, instructor, uh, with an emphasis on teaching the African American community. So it was a dual certification. So I did that for a number of years.
So you've been
This
like
was
just
in,
giving back for like a big chunk of your
oh
life
yeah,
here. I mean, this is what you're
oh
about.
yeah. So this was in 90, this was from 94 to 97. I was doing that. Uh, I got into doing IT at that job because I was helping out because they had a real small IT department, was two people in there. So I was working at one of the satellite offices, started doing IT work there, started working at TEMS services. I learned how to build computers from scratch on my own. I could take them apart, put them together, upgrade them, doing all kind of stuff. So you needed more memory, a hard drive, a CD burner, I was the guy. And so that metamorphosized to me getting my first job um, at a company that did they provided software for stockbrokers. So when you look at the stock market news sites and then you see the scrolling ticker, we provided the software and the tech support for those companies.
Oh, wow.
Had
Okay.
uh, so fast forward to uh, 2006. I meet a guy who was the chief paramedic for St. Louis City Fire and EMS. I was working in IT still. So uh, he said, one of our early meetings, we were just talking shop, and he was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm working in IT. I'm in school at the University of Phoenix in Earth City, getting my bachelor's degree in information systems." And the job I was working at, I was kind of disgruntled because they kept passing me up for a team lead position.
Hmm.
And so he said, "You ever thought about EMS?" And I was like, "Yeah." He said, "What do you think about it?" I said, "When 9/11 hit." So this is in '06 when we were having this conversation. He
Yeah.
said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I remember exactly where I was on 9/11. I was there, I was 10 minutes late for work. And when I'm running in, and they had this big lobby, and they had one of those big box TVs that the old school TVs before the flat panel TVs came out, and they had the news on, and the North Tower had just gotten hit
Yeah.
right before I came in, and so everybody was standing around the TV. I thought it was like a news, or a movie or something like that, and they were like, "No, this actually just happened." Because the first tower got hit at 8:46 or whatever. So I got in there at 8:56, and they were like, "Oh my God," and I'm just sitting there. The thing that about 9/11 that struck me was after the buildings collapsed. I remembered, and I don't know if you remember this, but they had all of the public service workers, police, fire, EMS, the Port Authority workers, all the city employees, they formed two long lines because, that was a crime scene also. People forget about that. The
Oh,
whole
yeah.
site was a crime scene. They had two long lines of these public service workers that were passing buckets of rubber down to clear ground zero. And I just remember you would have first responders that would leave their shifts, whatever they shifts were, and then they would go right to the site. Third Watch, the TV show, they did a segment on that because they were filming right in New York when 9/11 happened. This was a show about police, fire, and EMS
Yeah.
folks. So I just remember wanting to be one of those people that was in that line because I just felt so helpless. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm like, man, we just got attacked. All these people lost their lives. All these firefighters and all these other public service workers died doing some heroic stuff, trying to save people, and unfortunately, they lost their lives. And subsequently, you still have people dying from a lot of the fallout from the asbestos in the
Right.
air when nobody was really wearing masks back then when they
No.
were clearing grounds. They weren't working down there at that site. So that was what stuck out in my head. I was like, man, I wish I could have just went to New York and just, hey, here's a sandwich, here's some water, because that was the other thing. People were giving them food and water and comfort and hugs and all that stuff, because that was a very brave thing for me to see. And here we go. In 2006, we're having this conversation, and he said, "Well, I'm going to show you a PowerPoint on what EMS is all about." Because I didn't really know. I just like, oh, you need help, you just call 911 or what have you. And he showed me this PowerPoint. I didn't know that there was a difference between EMTs and paramedics and all that stuff. And what I learned is all paramedics are EMTs, but not all EMTs are paramedics. It's a licensure level that you have to
Oh,
ascend. You
I
see?
didn't know that either. Okay.
So there's 4 levels. So you have your emergency medical responders. So these are your people like lifeguards, your police officers, anybody that has a CPR certification that can do basic life support interventions in an emergency situation. Then you have your EMT level. So you start off as an EMT basic. That's a 3-month program that you can take at a community college or a technical school or wherever they offer these, because there more and more places are offering EMT basic programs, and you can do basic life support things. And so then the next level is the advanced EMT. It used to be called EMT intermediate. They do everything that the basic level does, and they do some advanced procedures, like they can start IVs. Basic can't do that. They can give some medications, and then the top tier level is my level, which is the EMT paramedic.
Mm.
Most people don't know this, that the technical term or the technical name for a paramedic is a physician surrogate. So
Mm.
we literally are docs and rolling boxes because we're trained to do advanced life-saving procedures like defibrillations, cardioversions. I can put somebody in a medically induced coma with just me and you, Roy, without any medical experience. I just need an extra set of hands. I can say, hey, here's a needle, here's a syringe. I need you to draw up 5 milligrams of lidocaine, draw it up to this line. Make sure that it says that it's lidocaine. Make sure that it's not expired. It's not clear. I mean, it's clear. It's not cloudy. So on and so forth. I'm getting ready to intubate this person. Once I get the tube and their windpipe, I'm going to hook it up to all this stuff. I need you to squeeze the bag every, one breath every 5 to 6 seconds or whatever. If I got to do CPR, we're going to rotate every 2 minutes. Okay. So, but all the advanced stuff
Wow.
I'll do, but I just need an extra set of hands. When you go in a hospital, you got 6 to 8 people that are doing an intubation or whatever. So as a paramedic, all I need is one other person. So,
Wow.
and then the person, I mean, legally they do have to be certified and all that stuff, but I'm just
Sure.
saying, actuality, I just need another set of hands, So, um, as a paramedic, there's other things that I can do. So we're junior cardiologists, we're junior respiratory therapists. So I got in the EMS in 2007, and then I got licensed as a paramedic. And so as a paramedic, I started doing a lot of different things uh, at the job that I work, because the company I work for is under American Medical Response, which is the nation's largest EMS provider. So they operate in 44 plus states. And so they'll buy, so a lot of cities, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural, you'll see AMR ambulances around the country. If you look at the movie, Miami Vice, the movie with Colin Farrell and Jamie Foxx,
Hmm.
at the end, they had to shoot out with the bad guys. At the end, when the ambulance showed up, it was an AMR ambulance. You'll see in the one of the scenes.
Okay.
Also, Tom Cruise's series Mission Impossible. So if you look at Mission Impossible 3, when his wife gets kidnapped, there's an AMR ambulance in that scene when he's walking, I think either in the hospital or out of the hospital looking for her. But she had just got kidnapped by one of the bad guys, henchmen or what have you.
Right.
So when you're looking at some of these movies and TV shows, you can see AMR ambulances. So I worked for a company that was under AMR. We did a lot of high level stuff because we were associated with Barnes-Jewish Hospital, which is a level 1 hospital in St. Louis, one of the 3. And Barnes-Jewish Hospital is number 6 of the top 10 hospitals in the United States. So we did a lot of high level stuff. infectious disease stuff, transports. We did critical care type stuff. So I was on the critical care team. I worked for, we had a contract with Lambert International Airport in St. Louis. We did all of their EMS care. So you had to, be pass all these security clearances and background checks to work at the airport because you're working in the secure areas. So did a lot of those different things, some special projects. We did EMS for the St. Louis Cardinals, the St. Louis Blues. So I worked 2 of the home games the year that they won the Stanley Cup in 2019. There's a lot of different interesting things that I did. And then I got into the fire service in 2019. So I was hired as a paramedic firefighter. Now I just use, and most of us just say fireman. So because a lot of your fire departments want you to be dual trained
Okay.
because 85% of your 911 calls outside of law enforcement or medical. And so we want the community, whether it's a fire department or a fire protection district, it depends on the tax base of that community, wants those men and women, or however they identify, those people that are in uniform on those apparatuses to be dual trained and certified. So I started working as a firefighter also, and this is where it gets interesting. So I'm fast forwarding to 2020.
Oh boy.
This thing called COVID is starting to hit the scene. I'm up to my eyeballs, Roy, and when I say up to my eyeballs, I'm past that. Okay, I work for a so in St. Louis, you got St. Louis City, which is its own county, and then you have St. Louis County, which is made up of 92 municipalities. Everybody pretty much knows about Ferguson. So we were neighbors with Ferguson's fire district, and we provided mutual aid for them because they didn't have as many apparatuses as we had.
Okay.
And so our fire protection district covers 17 of those 92 munis. Um, and that covered 3 zip codes. Those 3 zip codes had the highest number of COVID cases throughout the entire state of Missouri.
Wow.
So when COVID hit, we were treating it like when Ebola hit the United States. We thought, oh, it's only going to be here for a little bit, and maybe it'll kind of just phase out. Because, if you go to the ER now, they still ask you those Ebola questions. Have you visited any Western African countries lately?
Right.
That's still on all these checklists or whatever. It's a reason for that. So when COVID started making its way here to the States, we were kind of thinking it was going to be like that. Well, so I'm getting ready to go to the fire academy to get my professional fire certifications because you could work as a firefighter, uh, but they wouldn't let me do the first part of firefighting, which is the offensive stuff. So actually going into the burning buildings. I did the second part, which is the overhaul. So once the building is extinguished, you go in with a pipe pole, you're poking holes in the walls and the ceilings looking for hot spots and doing fire investigations and all this stuff. So I was part of that part. And so I was supposed to go to the fire academy April 13th, 2020. So in March of 2020, my wife, Mrs. LP, she has a number of autoimmune issues. One affects her lungs in particular. And like I said, everybody in my fire department and my EMS service was getting COVID. I had the same COVID patient twice in 1 week. My deputy chief from the fire department, he almost died from COVID. And so, because of my proximity working with all these COVID patients and coworkers, and my wife gets sick really easy also. And so we talked to her doctor. He's like, if she get COVID, it's probably going to come from you and she's probably going to die. So this is in March of 2020. I said, well, honey, she was born and raised in North Carolina. We met in St. Louis, but she's from North Carolina, and most of her family lives in North Carolina in the Charlotte area. I said, why don't you pack up about a week's worth of clothes, go hang out with your family, maybe, because we're still thinking this COVID stuff is going to go away. So the next week, they did the worldwide shutdown.
Oh.
And then we were like, right on our anniversary, because it's March 16th.
Wow.
And And we were like, I said, this stuff ain't going nowhere for real now. They just did the worldwide shutdown. The last time they did that was with the Spanish flu in 1918 and stuff or whatever. This
Right.
is for real. And so we're all scared to death. And I'm like, I can't put my wife at more risk. So me and other first responders and other essential workers, it wasn't that we didn't, there's still this gap in staffing because a lot of us retired. Some of it was because we ourselves had medical issues, and a lot of it was because we had loved ones that had medical issues, like Mrs. LP. And my thought process is, I can get another job. I don't want to have to get another wife.
Yeah,
And
right. I hear you.
Mama LP raised me to, she always taught me this as a little boy. She said, you never get attached to a building unless you own it or your name is on it. You are always an independent contractor. I don't want you flipping out if you get fired or laid off or they do some job reduction type of stuff. You need to be skilled enough that you can, whatever job you want to do, you have the ability to go and get that job, keep your name clean, because you may need to have security clearance. So glad I did that because now I'm doing jobs where I have to have security clearance.
Yeah.
Make sure that you get as much education as you can get, whether it's a degree or certifications and stuff. So I talk a lot about, I'm a proponent of STEM education because one of the things that I promote is, I'd say, science and technology take up the first two things in relationship to EMS and fire. And I go into how all that is. And, just from that point on, I retired from fire and EMS. We relocated to Charlotte because we were going to move to Charlotte in 2026 when my youngest child, my daughter, graduates from high school. And so a year later, we started this company called Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. And initially, we were helping people that were startup entrepreneurs get their LLCs and do all the back office type stuff. Because my wife is an internationally known project manager for a Fortune 100 company.
Nice.
They call it a closer and a fixer. And me, before I retired on August 19, 2019, there's an online article that you can look up on U.S. News and World Report. So if you go to usnews.com and type in my name on their search bar, or the name of the article is called Diversity Emergency, you'll see that article, and it talks about the need for more diversity in emergency medicine and why that's important. And it features me, the guy that got me into EMS, my mentor. His name is Monroe Yancey. He's nationally and internationally known as a paramedic instructor. And Dr. David K. Tan, who is a well-known EMS physician. And so, and he also works at Barnes Jewish Hospital as he's the one of the attending physicians.
Okay.
So that article to date has spawned over 40 plus international peer-reviewed case studies. So it was phenomenal. So I started getting pulled in as a subject matter expert on all kind of things related to EMS and public health and public safety. And so I started incorporating that because I still had my license and a ton of certifications. I started doing CPR training, CPR aid for adults, children, and infants. So I'm certified through the American Heart Association, the American Red Cross, and the American Health and Safety Institute. I also have certs to teach Stop the Bleed. So I have 4 of those certifications. 2 of them, one is stopthebleed.org, one is Stop the Bleed Coalition, one is through the American Red Cross, and the other one is through the American Health and Safety Institute. So I travel all across the country from VA to CA, teaching
Wow.
Stop the Bleed, public, private entities, civilians, whomever. So our biggest client that we've had to date is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn flew me and my work partner, one of my work partners, out there to Sunnyvale, California, in Silicon Valley. and we train a number of they call them executive protection professionals. So these are the people that do security for your celebrities, your VIPs, your CEOs, and so on and so forth. And we did a 5-hour training at LinkedIn in their corporate headquarters in Silicon Valley. It was phenomenal.
Wow.
So I traveled across the country just doing all of this stuff, either stop the bleed or CPR certifications. Most of my training that I do for the CPR stuff is in the Southeast. So Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina. I cover pretty much those 3 states, but I've started to travel more outside of that, doing that stuff. But we really started to focus also on doing podcasting. So we created this podcast called Trigger Warning Talk Podcast, all 4 words.
Now, how
So
do
it's
you, how
a
do you have
tool.
time to do a podcast and everything else that you're doing?
Hey, we all got the same 24 hours. It's just what you do in your 24 hours.
Right.
So it can get hectic. We have over 84 episodes so far. I got a bunch of them that I haven't even put out yet because I've been doing so much traveling
That's
or what
great.
have you. But
That
yeah,
is great.
uh, so the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, again, it's all 4 words. We're streaming on 14 platforms. You can watch the interviews in 2 places also. Our YouTube channel, which is the company name, Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC, and Spotify, the free version. You can watch those interviews. But whatever your favorite podcast, whether it's Our Radio, Audible, Google and Apple Podcasts, whatever your favorite podcast platform, we're on those major ones and some small ones. And so we cover human and sex trafficking, domestic violence, sexually based offenses, true crime, and at the end of every episode, we cover a missing person case. Now, 99% of those cases we cover are Black and brown folks because we wanted to bring the same media attention to those stories that we don't see too much in mainstream media. And so Mrs. LP not only is an internationally known project manager, she's an unlicensed, uncertified, true crime, unsolved detective. She doesn't like the ones that solve because she gets bored when it's like, oh, I know how it but she loves the unsolved cases, and she's gotten involved in some national cases, especially in the St. Louis area. And as I was telling you, you won't see her in the interview or in the media because she's always behind the scenes. She's very shy and introverted, but I'm telling you, she has helped some families deal with those situations. Um, One in particular, there was a young lady named Monica Sykes in the St. Louis area. She was missing. I think she was 25 years old. Berkeley PD, which was one of those munis around Ferguson, all these law enforcement, alphabet boys and girls, as we call them, got involved. Nobody could find her. She was dating this cop that was in Berkeley also, and he was a suspect. And so nobody could find her for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. So Mrs. LP reached out to her mom and said, "Hey, I just want to help you. Like whatever I can do. You don't have to pay me anything or whatever. I can get resources for you." So she said, "Yeah." So she contacted this company in Texas that do search and rescue, and they brought all of their equipment and cadaver dogs, and all this stuff. They found this young lady's body.
Your wife contacted these folks?
Yeah, and she didn't know the family at all. She was just my wife is, how they talk about, oh yeah, you're gonna say whatever because you're biased because that's your wife. Here's how I deal with bias, and I'll get to that at the end. So she, through her networking, contacted this organization that does search and rescue. They're a nonprofit company. I think they're called Texas Search and Rescue. They brought some of their equipment, their cadaver dogs, and all that stuff to the St. Louis County area of Berkeley, and they found Monica's body, unfortunately.
Wow.
But they found her dead, but they found her, and they gave closure to the family.
Yeah.
And again, you didn't see my wife at the press conference. You didn't see her in the media or none of that stuff because she's not that person. She's not looking for all that. She just wants to help people. She's a great humanitarian. So in terms of bias, I say you read my CV. If you didn't know anything about me, you don't know anything about me. We just met today
Right.
in through the Zoom meeting. So, but reading my CV, if somebody said, "Well, what do you know about LP?" He seems like he's such a great guy. He's this, back, bop, 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 bop. You should be able to say that just looking at my CV. So if I gave you Mrs. LP's CV, you would probably be able to say some of the same things without meeting her. But a lot of times people think, oh, you're just making all these great conversations about this person because that's your wife or that's your buddy or that's your
Uh,
friend and all this stuff. It's like, no, you talk about people for who they are. And if you just stick to the facts, we can just deal with the facts, okay? Everybody got an opinion. We know about opinions, what that means or whatever, but let's just talk about the facts because I like having conversations without confrontation. I learned that from a friend of mine. Let's have conversations without confrontation. And so also one of the things that I talk about a lot is public health, public safety, and gun safety. I don't get
mhm.
into the 2A or the Second Amendment or the politics. I leave that for the pros. I can talk about gun safety in particular to anybody. So what I normally say is if you have a child and that child starts crawling, or they can say mama or daddy, what do you do as that caregiver or that parent in your home with that child? You start baby proofing the house, right?
Absolutely.
Electric covers, baby gates, you name it. Fire extinguishers, you got smoke detectors, you got all these different things. You don't touch lighters, you don't touch matches, you don't touch anything flammable, you don't even touch my purse or my wallet. Okay, if you touch it, I'm gonna break it. You're gonna get knocked out or something like that. All of
Right.
these things, we threaten the kid. So the other question I'll ask, when was the last, and I'm going to ask you this, and this is not a rhetorical question. Roy, when was the last time you saw a news story on any media where a kid got electrocuted because they stuck a knife or a fork in an electric outlet? I'll wait.
I can't think of one, to be honest with you. Yeah, I haven't seen that in a long time.
You know why that is? I just told you. Because the moment that a kid can crawl or say mama or dad, that what do? We drill it in their head. You don't touch an outlet. I don't care if I got all these plastic caps plugged into that outlet. You don't mess with lighters and matches and flammables and all this stuff. Don't mess with the gas stove. Don't make sure you're not leaving the burners on, so on and so forth, or whatever. Well, swap out any of those dangers, the lighters, the matches, the flammables, the purse, whatever. Don't mess with the outlet. Swap that out with a firearm. It's the same conversation. What did you not hear me say, though? I didn't say nothing about any political party. I say nothing about 2A or the Second Amendment. That's how I can engage with people. Fill in the blank. Whatever party, wherever you live, how much money you got, however you identify, I don't have to get into all this stuff. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. If I needed a kidney, I need one human being that meets two criteria, Roy. A willing donor who's a match. Okay. It doesn't matter if it's a woman from Asia or if it's a guy from, you know, the Netherlands. Okay, they don't have to be a black and brown person like me. It could be somebody who identifies as female. Doesn't matter. I need a human being that meets two criteria. They're imaginary willing donor. I'm not getting one from a goat or a giraffe. I'm getting one from another human being.
Right.
So when I teach CPR classes, when I have my mannequins, I say so. A lot of classes I do primarily for the American Red Cross. I say the American Red Cross wants me to train you how to help another human being in an emergency situation, whether they're unconscious or unresponsive or whatever the medical issue is that we're covering. So we're covering adult CPR, we're covering adult AED, we're covering how to teach somebody that's choking, we're covering about sudden illnesses or environmental issues or whatever the class is, life-threatening bleeding, stop the bleed, all of that stuff. I got trained to be a consultant doing active shooter hostile events or what people think of run, hide, fight, or avoid, defend, deny. I'm also got trained when I was in EMS. We did a CU class on tactical EMS. So I talk about a lot of that stuff because I always say it's not a matter of if, but when and where an emergency is going to happen. And what are you prepared to do in that event? Because we train people to be immediate responders before the first responders show up. Okay, I'm pointing to the stuff behind me, all the fire
Right.
stuff or whatever. So I train people to be immediate responders because the average EMS response time is 7 to 15 minutes. Okay, it could be longer if you live in a rural environment. It could
Sure.
be longer if they're running into traffic issues or what have you. So let's talk about stop the bleed real quick. The average time that it takes for a person to bleed out from a massive trauma or major bleed, and I'm talking about an arterial bleed, the blood spurting out like Old Faithful, or it's pouring out like you pouring a soda can out on the ground, or like spilled milk. Okay, those are major bleeds. It's not a little paper cut or a little, venous bleed. You know, 3 to 5 minutes. So the average EMS response time is 7 to 14. You're already behind the eight ball, you know. And what if you have somebody that's in cardiac arrest, meaning that they're unresponsive because they lost their heartbeat and they can't breathe? Unconscious and unresponsive are two different things. Okay, unconscious person is alive, but they're just out cold for whatever reason. Unresponsive is dead,
Hmm.
medically speaking,
Right.
because you don't have a heartbeat anymore, and you don't have the ability to breathe, and you need both of those functions, and they work together. You need both of those functions to be alive. Once those two things stop, you're considered clinically dead. So if I show up on the scene and I got two people, one is unconscious, the other is unresponsive, the unconscious person, oh, I can see they're moving, they're moaning a little bit or something like that. 1 to 10, they're just out cold. Think about boxers, okay? They're still alive. Give them some smelling salts, give them a little TLC, they'll be all right. Everybody's going to have, me and my team are going to be totally focused on that unresponsive person because now we got to put hands on the chest. We got to do some defibrillation possibly, excuse me. And there's some other things. I might have to intubate that person or whatever. If I am not working, but I go into a store or I'm at a mall and I see somebody in aisle 9 that's laid out on the ground. Well, this ain't Myrtle Beach and tanning beds in the shopping mall right there or at the grocery store. There's a reason that that person is laid out. What am I prepared to do to help that person? If they are bleeding out, I need to do something to stop the bleed because they're gonna die if I don't stop that bleed or
Right.
get right on it. Let's say that they got shot or stabbed and they're in cardiac arrest, meaning that they don't have a heartbeat or a pulse. What do you do first? Do you stop the bleed or do you do CPR? If you say I do CPR first, I'm going to tell you 100% of those people are going to die because
Wow.
CPR is circulating the blood that's in the body, and hopefully it's enough oxygenated blood to resuscitate that person. But if you don't stop the bleed, it's just like your blood in your body is like oil to your car's engine. Okay, your body's the engine. What happens when your oil gets too low to that engine? You throw a ride, you need a whole nother engine, right?
Right.
You can't be like, oh, give me a cup. I'm gonna scoop all that blood up and I'm gonna pour it back in that person's wound or put it in their mouth or whatever. Okay. We bleed out, we bleed in. Okay. So it doesn't work like you need bright lights and cold steel in an OR. And a lot of EMS services now doing blood transfusions in the field. They're carrying whole blood. So that's something to check with your local EMS services and see if they offer that service. But I teach on all of these things because it's all under public health and public safety and gun safety. We talk about the 4 universal safety rules when it comes to firearms. So there's an acronym called TANK, like an army tank. So for your visual audience, I like props. I'm holding up a prop here. This is a prop. It is not an actual firearm, so nobody freak out. Okay, this is all hard plastic. Okay, it's yellow, looks like a lemon. Okay, so there's no magazine that can be released. I can't move the slide. Okay, but I'm
Gotcha.
going to hold and I'm going to treat it like a firearm. This is my teaching prop. Okay,
Okay.
so uh, again, this is a prop, okay? No moving parts, no ammo, okay? So the 4 universal safety rules when it comes to firearms, use the acronym TANK. So T, treat all firearms as if they're loaded and perform a clearance check to make sure that there is no round in the chamber before you handle it or hand it off to someone. Okay, that's T. A, always be aware of stuff. Okay, that's why we tell people don't shoot your gun in on New Year's Eve, because what most people do, they shoot their gun in the air. Well, bullets go up and they got to come down, and they come down at the same velocity that they went up. So a lot of people die on New Year's Eve because they get struck by these rounds or what have you, especially in St. Louis, because it's like being in Iraq, you know, on New Year's Eve. I'm telling you, they start 2 weeks before and they continue 2 weeks after. So that's A. There was a case that happened in LA where a guy came in and he was wielding a knife. LAPD responded. They tried to get the guy to drop the knife. He wouldn't. It escalated. They fired a few rounds at the guy. One round missed. That round went into a wall, and through that wall, and on the other side of that wall was a dressing room, where in that dressing room was a teenage girl who got struck by that round and died.
Yeah, man.
So, you know, the next thing is N. Never point your weapon at anything that you're not willing to destroy. That includes any weapon. It doesn't have to be a firearm, but we just say that. And then K, keep your finger off the trigger and outside the trigger guard until you have acquired your target and are ready to shoot. So if you want to teach your kids or anybody in your home, whether you have guns or not, or any weapons in your house, especially firearms, Google the 4 universal safety rules or 4 universal firearm safety rules, and you'll learn. And they got different acronyms, but that's kind of the most common. But we talk about that all the time because I get breaking news stories every single day. A lot of it because of my security clearance and the work that I used to do about these violent critical incidents that the government is supposed to be switching from active shooter hostile events to violent critical incidents. So think about what happened in 2013, the Boston Marathon issue. No firearms. It was just an explosive. Think about
Right.
those 4 students that got killed at the University of Idaho. All these incidents don't involve firearms all the time. So we just talk about what's important for you to remember when it comes to safety issues. I yield my mic.
I mean, you might have been the easiest interview I've ever had to do because I mean, I don't think I've worked at all so far. You're a great guest, man. You really are. Um, I love
You
all that.
know, you know how we all, you know how podcasters are. We're producers also. So
I know it. I know it. I love when I'm interviewing other podcasters because you're used to talking, so I don't have to like pull anything out of anybody. I mean, you have so much stuff in your background, man. I mean, it's incredibly impressive, first of all. So, I mean, power to you in a big way because you've built quite the base to work from there. And I mean, it is. It's impressive. It's the only word I can think of right now. You moved into podcasting. Is that to spread the word when you got into podcasting? Was it to spread the word about everything you've just talked about and like what you do, or was it to delve into other areas? Because I mean, you do handle some pretty heavy topics on your podcast.
the reason that we came up with this podcast was not only because of the work that Mrs. LP does with missing persons and true crime. It was also because I remember when I was at the fire department, we had a training one day after we cleaned up. This was day one of our two, because we did 48 hours, 2 days on, 4 days off. So first day we come in, start at 7:30. We do all the cleanup and all this stuff for the firehouse, top to bottom. And then there's a initial training, whether it's a class or just, hey, we want to go over some whatever. So the battalion chief on the shift commander that day, he was sitting in front of the class or standing in front of the class, and he just had this very serious look on his face. And he looked at all of us, and it was probably 10 of us in there. And he said, you all have picked a job that literally is trying to kill you every single time you put on the uniform. We're going to have some additional trainings come in, not just EMS and fire related, but stuff that's related to our job. So they brought in a guy who is a trafficking expert, human and sex trafficking expert. He did a 90-minute presentation, had about roughly under 100 slides with videos on them. At the end of that uh, class, he was like, Q&A time. Anybody got any questions? I did like this. Raised both my hands up.
Yeah.
All right, Penton, what's okay? Why you got both hands up? I got questions. And so I said, can you go back to slide such and such? I had a question on one of the charts that was on there. So he did, he answered the question. He was like, what's your other question? I said, and I just looked around at everybody. I said, how many of us in here, because we probably had over 500 years of experience collectively, maybe more. I said, how many of us in here have had a class like this before on traffic? Nobody raised their hand. I said, that's a problem because we deal with people in all of these situations all the time when we respond on these EMS calls. Okay. I've gotten calls where I showed up and it was a woman who was the patient and she didn't talk. The guy talked. Okay. And it was, your antenna story and some of the stuff that the instructor was pointing out. I remember, I said, I know, I was looking at y'all faces. Y'all were like, that happened to me, and everybody started chiming in or whatever. And I'm like, why is we not getting this on a regular basis, even if it's annually or whatever? So there's an app called Clubhouse. I started going on Clubhouse and I started joining some of these rooms or these groups or houses, as they call them. And I would be one, if not the only person on there that had first responder experience talking about these topics and stuff, because I wanted to learn more about it because it's so much part of what we hear. We just think when it comes to trafficking, either people coming in some shipping container across the pond or they're crossing the US-Mexico border in some people mover. We don't realize that trafficking happens more here than it does people being brought here. So I wanted to talk about human and sex trafficking. Domestic violence happens everywhere domestically, whether that's a place that you live or that's a place that your workplace, because a lot of us spend more hours almost at work than we do, pre-COVID than at home. Uh, when we talk about sexual based offenses, that stuff happens all the time. It doesn't matter how you identify. And all of these topics that we cover, it doesn't matter how you identify. It doesn't matter how you vote. It doesn't matter if you live in an urban, suburban, or rural environment. It affects all of us because we're humans. It's humans doing ugly crap to other humans.
Right.
And how do we deal with those situations? I do this. If you can, for your viewers, I got my hand out like a diving board, but it's not trembling. It's not shaking. As a first responder, I used to tell people, I have to be the eye in a hurricane of your emergency. I'll say it again. I have to be the eye in a hurricane of your emergency. I could be a 9.9 magnitude earthquake and I'm pointing to my chest where my heart is. But I gotta be the eye in a hurricane of your emergency so I can help you in that situation. Because if I'm
Right.
already, I'm gonna miss something. I'm not gonna be focused or whatever. And safety is always first, just like when you go on a plane. Those masks drop down, you put your mask on first before you help somebody else. So the same thing applies, especially in an emergency situation. So I cover all of those things and why that's important. But as far as and so in the podcast, I wanted to talk about things because in podcast land, there's podcasts about trafficking and domestic violence and sexual based offenses and stuff, true crime,
Right.
missing persons. I didn't see one podcast that covered all five of those things, especially from a first responder perspective,
Right.
especially from a guy that's a first responder who's talking about all five of those things in one podcast. I always want to be different. I don't want to, reinvent the wheel. I just want to make the ride smoother.
Yeah.
So that's where the Trigger Warning Talk podcast was birthed.
That is
And
unique.
we've been
Yeah.
people all across the globe. Uh, some of our biggest ones, there's a woman named Rasha Hamad. She's in Switzerland. She's an internationally known trafficking expert. Her organization is called Youth Underground. She used to work at the UN. Her parents worked at the UN, and she's been involved in trafficking education for years. You know, if you go on IGN, search Youth Underground or Rasha Hamad, RASHAHAMMAD, you'll see her. I'm talking about, we interview authors, we interview people that have doctorates or advanced degrees. We talk with a lot of mental health professionals. We talk with people that don't have a big name behind them, but they got a story to tell.
Right.
My biggest Spotify interview is a woman who's a wife of an Air Force airman who talked about being sexually abused by her stepfather. You know, and that was an audio only one, but we interviewed everybody, you know, and I always say, I just need you to be bluntly honest. We have uncensored conversations, so you might hear some adult language. We provide resources in the show notes, and we provide a bunch of information for every show. And
Right.
so our podcast, again, wants to tackle those issues, and we have fun too on the show. You know, it's not all blood and guts. You know,
Sure.
so uh, but we like all our listeners, but we also encourage you to watch the videos, because a lot of times I'll pull up information on I'll do a screen share. One of my big interviews is with nationally known ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience educator from Missouri, and we did a 3-part series with her. We just recorded part 4, where we're talking about everything about ACEs. First part was her story. Second part was everything you need to know about ACEs, using the CDC.gov site, because they do a lot of stuff on ACEs. And the third part, we always talk about modalities, whether we do a single episode or a multiple episode interview. We always end in modalities, because people always want to talk about stuff. And then when it's like, well, what do we do about it? Oh, well, just contact me. No, well, what is the modality that you're going to use? I say seek help, whatever help that is, be it
Right.
therapy, be it, you know, extracurricular activities or whatever. Because and I came up with this quote: mental health crisis is the world's oldest continuous pandemic that's been around since the beginning of mankind, and it ain't going nowhere. And you can look throughout history, you can see all types of mental health crises going on. We got to address that, because we got to get rid of the stigmas, the taboos, and the stereotypes. Because people still think when it comes to mental health, they'll say, it's just like a great icebreaker when you meet somebody. What's the first thing that you think of when you hear the word mental health? Most people say crazy, insane, or lunatic. And they think about the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, people being drugged up, standing in corners, looking like the Walking Dead, you know, in straitjackets and stuff. That stuff used to happen. You don't see those things like you used to, because mental health care and therapy has come a long way. People used to get lobotomies like they did in the
Right.
movie,
Yeah.
but now they do electric shock therapy, you know, which is a milder form of that. And I've transported people that were getting ECT, and I'm telling you, I would see the difference when we came back to pick them up 4 hours later, in their demeanor and their attitudes and all this stuff or whatever. So mental health care, if you need it, seek help. If you're suicidal, call 988. That number is toll free 24/7. You can call it anytime. Call your local 911 number, especially if you live outside of the US. You know, it might be 112 or 143 in the UK, or 999 or what have you. Find your local emergency number and store that stuff in your phone, because it's not a matter of if, but when and where an emergency is going to happen. And what are you prepared to do in this situation? We want you to be a bystander, not a by doer.
I like that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I switched that around. We want you to be a by doer, not a
Not a
bystander.
bystander. Okay. The
Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah.
no, I got you. It's, I mean, your podcast is going a long way towards, further in this, which is great. And I know that's one of the reasons why you want to expand the reach, of this. One of the reasons why, I was lucky enough to have you come on today. But in the interest of time, let me talk a little bit about the podcast itself.
Absolutely.
You're a tech expert to begin with, so you probably didn't have most of the issues that a lot of us that start podcasts had at the beginning. I mean, when you and I were setting up for today, I mean, you had like 3 different mics going that you could use. Most of us are like, if this mic doesn't work, I'm in a lot of trouble. But what was it like?
Redundancy. You gotta have.
Yeah, what was it like starting your podcast? What did you use to start with, and what are you still using today?
My bread and butter is my MacBook Pro.
Okay.
It has a great built-in web camera. The mic is great, and I just use the built-in speakers. And then I got a LOGI HD 1080p webcam that gives me greater resolution.
Mm.
Um, I also bought an external mic also, and I'll show you on the screen here. Hey,
Oh
just
yeah.
an external, it's pink for breast cancer awareness also. So my wife has one in her office. But I go between is like I'll start with the external cam because it has a built-in mic also. And if that doesn't work, I'll use my external mic and the built-in webcam or what have you. So if one fails, I got a backup because we always say two is one and one is none when we're talking about like having tourniquets and stuff or whatever. So
Okay.
two is one is none. But
That's a
yeah,
good
it was
idea to
it
have a
was
backup.
yeah, it was really something that I had to get used to doing. And the editing process, which can be time consuming. Finding the guests aren't really hard to find. It's just who is your audience? Who do you want to present on there?
Oh
There are
yeah.
people that I've done a pre-interview and I didn't put their interview out, or we just stopped at that point because we don't do bigotry on our podcast. Okay. Uh, we also are not a debate podcast. So, if I'm interviewing you, I'm not gonna be like, "Hey, Roy, I found somebody to say you're full of crap on what you're talking about today. I brought them on as a surprise guest, and they're going to counter what you're saying and all this stuff." We don't do that. Okay, we don't do that. Okay, if you wrote a book or something like that, we'll highlight your book and all that. I like the podcasting because you get to tell full stories. You can do a short version, you can do a longer version, you can break it up in parts or what have you.
Right.
It allows the everyday person who's not part of this big media conglomerate to talk and get information out. It's just like most of the companies in the US are not big businesses, they're small businesses,
Sure.
you know. And so we're just small business people that are providing a service. And whether you're getting paid for it or not, you know, hopefully you can start generating revenue. But you know what? Some people don't even care about that. It's like, hey, I just want to have communications and I just want to have conversations without confrontation. Okay. And some podcasts are soliloquy based. Ours is not. Ours, we always interview people. Okay.
Right.
I do have another one that's focusing on medical emergencies or medical situations. And so, but we're in development of doing that. I did one before, and that was some years ago. But primarily, that's how I started, just learning the process of how to podcast.
Hmm.
And it's a continuous work in progress. It's just me doing it. I don't have anybody else working with me other than Mrs. LP. She finds the missing persons cases and she'll help me with the creative process on it. So you might, you know what? You might want to not put that in there. Now again, it's uncensored conversations, but sometimes she'll say, let's edit this part because we don't want that person to appear uh, the way that they're presented. Because I interviewed a lady one time and I haven't put her interview out, and she was just a basket case in terms of just so emotional because she had been sexually abused and she was telling the story. And after the interview, I just stopped. I said, I'm not going to put your interview out. We're going to have to redo this at a later time because you're really not ready to tell your story. There's only so much I can edit,
Right.
you know. Uh, and we don't do live interviews. We record live, but we don't do live ones because, like we were saying, if you got technical issues, I can't fix that, you
Right.
know, on a live stream. So maybe one day I'll do live, but right now I just rather record it because I can fix all of that stuff.
Yeah. That all makes sense. That's tough. When people are telling their story and they're not ready to be telling the story. I've been there a couple times myself, with some various podcasts that I've been a part of, and that's
Okay.
never easy because you want one of the reasons you want to do it, you want to give them the outlet to work
Yeah.
through it, and to spread their message, and they're coming on because they want to help somebody else deal with whatever they're dealing with, but they do have to be ready to do that
Yeah.
for
And
sure. Yeah.
that's why we still do pre-interviews for the most part. Our podcast is very organic, kind of like how yours is.
Hmm.
And so I'll come up, I don't send pre-drafted questions or anything like that. I'll do a pre-interview, maybe 30 minutes or so. Some of them have been longer. And I'll say, let's come up with 4 to 5 talking points. Okay. That'll be the basis of the questions because my ADD kicks in and sometimes I might go off script a little bit or something like that. No problem. It just brings in more flavor to the podcast.
Sure.
And so come up with talking points. I'll find, and in that conversation, I'll come up with the title for that particular episode. It'll be something that they said that just hits home for me or what have you. And so then we'll just set up the recording date and time that we're going to actually do the recording for the show. But I like the organic process of the podcast. I like that right now what we're doing I feel is very important and that it's going to expand and grow even more as well as the work that I'm doing outside of the podcast work. In particular, as far as being a podcaster, I would say this. I know there's a whole lot of competition with a lot of these celebrities and famous people. They got the money, they got the budgets, they got the name, they can get anybody to come in. So they're really making it tough for us smaller entrepreneurs that are doing podcasting to spread our because there's I don't know over 100,000 podcasts, easily over 100,000, and
There's a
when you
lot.
think of podcasts every celebrity almost has a podcast, whether they're an athlete, an actor, or whatever, and they got all this money and fame behind them. Like I said, they can get pretty much anybody and they can talk about anything if they're, whatever. So my encouragement to podcaster, whether you're just starting out or you're thinking about starting out, or you've been doing it for a minute, you got 50 episodes, 100 episodes, 5 episodes or more, stick with it. You know, you are your own competition. Okay. Yeah, you can't compete with the big boys and girls uh in terms of the dollars that they have at their disposal. However, what does that have to do with you and your message?
Right.
It doesn't have anything. Your own competition. If you feel like you got something to say and it's a soliloquy based podcast, say it. If you have a podcast that you only put out content once a week and it's only 15 minutes, not a minute, a second more, do it. If your podcast is 3 hours and you want to put out a 3 hour podcast, do it. Or break it up in 3 hours, 1 hour segments. Okay. You can make it. We do that all the time. So however you want to do it and produce it, learn the process. That's the fun part of it. Because when you put that product out there, I always say I'm birthing a podcast baby. On the excuse me, I sit there and I'm looking at all the analytics and stuff, but I'm not freaking out, because I might only got 4 listeners on the first day. Sometimes I get 1,000 listeners on the first day or viewers or what have you. You don't know what that process is going to be like. And that's why leaving a review is so important. A minimum of 4 word review. Hey, you got a great podcast. You know, uh, just hitting the like button is not enough for
Right.
us. The analytics, those algorithms are important. So leave a minimum of a 4 word review, written review. Go on Google and do a Google review if that podcast is associated to a company. Also, all of those things help. Uh, Subscribe. Share it with other people because you don't know how that's going to possibly help somebody else. Like with
Right.
our podcast, we offer the hotlines for domestic violence and sexual based offenses. So there's an organization called RAIN, Rape Abuse Incest National Network. We provide all 3 numbers for AANA and Al-Anon. If you have substance abuse issues, you know, whatever the resource that there's a resource for everything that we cover. And so we provide those links in the show notes for every single episode, along with the guest information, contact information. So
Yeah,
Trigger Warning Talk Podcast, all 4 words. And you'll
got
see
you.
our logo on that show things that we have that we cover in the logo. But it's Trigger Warning Talk Podcast, all 4 words, streaming on
Love it.
14 platforms.
Love it. No, what's been great is that, I've got, a list of questions that I try to kind of get through with folks, or at least, touch on some of these things. I didn't even have to ask them to you. Because as you just went through everything you were talking about, you literally were like answering my questions as we went. One of the last questions I ask everybody is, what's like one piece of advice you can give to podcasters? And as we're sitting here and sort of, wrapping up, you're like, and I have a piece of advice for podcasters. Let me just tell you, keep going.
Keep going.
I said, brother, this is beautiful.
You're your
I'm
own
just sitting here like I'm
competition.
a spectator today. This is great.
Yeah, you're your own competition. Keep going. Follow your passion. If your passion is getting a message out there, I don't care if you're talking about Zuzus and Wham Whams to cardiac arrest or sports or politics. Put it out there.
Right on.
Let the audience let the audience enjoy what you're providing. Okay.
Love it. Love it. Love
Got people they got millions of subscribers on TikTok and all they're doing is playing Legos.
it. I love it.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I hear you. In the interest of time, I do have to wrap it up. I'm sorry, man. I could talk to you forever. I really could, because you are just an absolute wealth of information. But, any last thoughts, parting words, or anything like that? Obviously, first start with how can everybody contact you? And of course, I'll put it in the show notes.
Sure.
And then any last words you might have for anybody.
I can be reached at my website, which is www.pentonpending.com. So it's pentonpending.com. There's a bunch of information on there that you can look up on our site. You can also email me, and there's a contact link with our email address, which is consultingsolutions@pentonpending.com. You can reach me on IG at LP Firemedic, all one word, LP Firemedic on IG. And you'll see a Linktree link on there that'll give you our other social media links. So on Facebook or Meta, I'm listed as Larry Cougar Penton Sr. My parting words of advice to people is I'm just going to reiterate a couple things that I said and put it all together.
Go
It's
for it.
not a matter of if, but when and where an emergency is going to happen. And what are you prepared to do? You need to be the eye in the hurricane of that person's emergency if you decide to get involved with helping that person in an emergency. And the best way that you can help somebody in an emergency is, hey, everybody got a smart device. Call 911. You can live stream and do whatever you want to do with it from that point. But call 911 first. Take a CPR, stop the bleed class. I teach those. I network with other people that teach those. I travel across the country teaching that stuff. Learn some life-saving, basic life support measures. And seek help if you need it. Because there's no shame, there's no stigma, taboo, or stereotype that's more important than you. When those oxygen masks drop, in the case of an emergency, put your mask on first before you help somebody else. And always be situationally aware because you don't want to be a victim of somebody else's nonsense because you were not focusing on what's going on around you, especially if you decide to help somebody. LP out.
That's great advice to end on, man. Thank you so much for being on today, man.
I appreciate your podcast and thank you for having me on as a guest. Make sure that y'all subscribe to Roy's podcast. Remember, networking is so important. And I'll always come back, Roy.
I,
Just
I
send me an invite.
I love it. We have so many more things to talk about. To be honest with you, that I mean, we could come back on and talk about any number of them. So I would love to have you back on in the future, man. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
All right.
this is just the Cliff Notes version.
I love it. I love it. All right, folks.
Thanks.
That has been Larry Cougar Penton Sr. And now you know where the Cougar comes from. Honestly, folks, check out his podcast, the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. I've listened to a few episodes already. It's deep stuff. It's incredibly informative. It's really well done. You're going to really be happy that you took a couple of minutes to invest that time in learning, in growing, and in knowing more about our world by listening to this guy and what he has to say. So, one note to everybody who's listening to this: if you are a podcaster, you need to be on our show. That is why we're here. That is what we're doing. Our point, our purpose, our mission is to let as many people know about you and your purpose as possible. The rising tide raises all ships. Get in the water. All right. The water's warm. Jump in. You guys all have a fantastic day. We will talk to you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Peace and blessings be upon you.